This is just a dedication. I'll do it first in Pali and then in English. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. So, short. This morning I'll be giving you an introduction to the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and I'd like to stress the word introduction because it's a really rich sutta. It's one of the central teachings for the Theravadan tradition, and one which also overlaps with other traditions. I believe all the Buddhist traditions share this sutta. And I'm really happy to be sharing it with you from the perspective which I've learned, because if I had one sutta I would probably take this one because it's so rich and full of many of the core teachings. So it comes from the Pali Canon, from the middle length discourses of the Buddha. I've been looking into the translation by Bhikkhu Nyanamoli and Bhikkhu Bodhi. So this is the middle length discourses, number 10, and it's called the Satipatthana Sutta. So the author, it's reputed to be the Buddha, thus have I heard, and it was given in the Kuru country. Now scholars believe that this is the area of modern-day Delhi. I'll be using the Pali words, and perhaps you'll know the Sanskrit equivalent, but I can't do that, so I'll just go with the Pali. So the word sati, it means mindfulness, and patthana has been usually translated as foundation, but some people feel it's better translated as establishing or abiding, having more of an emphasis on not so much on the object as much as on the activity. So why is this sutta important? First, as I said, it's common to all Buddhist traditions, so it's a very central teaching and contains within it many of the other central teachings. Secondly, the Buddha makes a very strong declaration about that. He says, bhikkhus, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of nibbana, namely the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So it's a pretty strong declaration of what is possible when one really cultivates this path. My own personal reasons to add to that is that I think it's very practical. It doesn't require special conditions because it has to do with what we have with us, our body and our mind. We carry with us wherever we go. So it's very accessible, and it can be applied to everything that we experience. So whatever mental states, whatever physical experience we're having, we can meet with this teaching. So what are these 4 foundations? They are the mindfulness of the body, or sometimes used the word contemplation of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, and mindfulness of mind objects. So the Pali words, mindfulness of body is kaya nupassana, feelings vedana nupassana, mindfulness of mind chitta nupassana, and mindfulness of mind objects dhamma nupassana. And I mention them because that word pasana in all of them, it means seeing into, seeing the reality of things as they are. And that's the whole purpose. It's not to elaborate and make it into something other. Sometimes those kind of contemplations are very useful, but the focus here is really to look at something and see what's really there. And with each of these four, I'll go into them individually, but with each one there's a refrain that's repeated after introducing each one. So here in the sutta it says, what are the four? And then it's a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as body. And the refrain is these words: ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. And it goes on, he abides contemplating feelings as feelings. And the same thing, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. So, by the way, I hope you just mentally, bhikkhus is everyone who's practicing on this path. He, she, just is the words that they use in the Pali Canon. So these words are quite significant. There is a lot of repetition in the teachings, the Pali Canon, because it was an oral tradition and it helped people to learn it. But it's not to be just glossed over when things are repeated. It's something that obviously has some significance. So I just want to highlight each of these words. The word ardent is about being sustained application of energy, enthusiasm, care, and continuity. So it's like you're really giving yourself to something. And fully aware and mindful, so it's not halfway present, it's really present with something, really engaged. Having put away grief and covetousness for the world, I feel that's about not pushing away or clinging. So our usual habitual way of relating to our experience is often through those two, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about feelings. So it's a very positive thing if we can put away the grief and covetousness and relate to the world apart from those. So this is telling us about the relationship we have to these objects, and it's saying that that's more important than the objects themselves. It's our attitude or how we attend that matters most. So to begin with, mindfulness of the body. By the way, if you have an urgent question, please do raise your hand. Actually, it doesn't have to be urgent. It could be any question. I would like to have time, it could be in between or it could be afterwards, to dialogue around these things and see how you may work with them in a different, maybe slightly different way. I'd like to learn, so please just hand up, stop me if I'm just going on a roll. So the mindfulness of the body, it's the first foundation. However, it's actually 14 exercises. Now, in saying that, it's not like it has to be done in a sequential manner. It's not like, during this, then this. The Buddha gives a whole variety of techniques, of types of meditation, and some are very suitable for some people and some aren't. And when I go through these, you might have a bit of a reaction with some, or maybe not, but it's actually not helpful for some people to do certain things. So the first one, which most people who learn about meditation learn about, is the mindfulness of breathing, or anapanasati. Now we might think, well, that's kind of simple, or just breathing. But actually breathing is, you can really look into the subtleties and notice whether you're breathing in long, or breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out short. It's not about adjusting your breath. It's not like a yoga activity. So it's just whatever's happening, noticing, and you can notice the breath. Actually, the Buddha doesn't say where to notice the breath. It's actually not in the teaching about only focusing on the tip of the nose or only focusing on the abdomen. You can choose. You can look at the breath as it comes in and how it travels down and how your abdomen swells and then goes back down. And what I also want to say about these different foundations of mindfulness is there's a lot of overlap between them. So say you were looking at your sensation of breathing in, you might notice where it feels, when it feels pleasant. And then at some point, maybe it feels neutral. And then at some point, it'll feel unpleasant. So there's a lot with looking at the breath. The Buddha also mentions experiencing the whole body when one's meditating on the breath. And this is all to be experienced directly, so I can't tell you how that would feel. It's for you, each of us, to know. He also talks about tranquilizing the body formation. So it does have a function of bringing some stability or tranquility. In the samatha tradition, it's a very big focus to use the breath, and that's mainly about really bringing a kind of focus and stability to the mind. So in each case, it's mentioned that the meditator knows or understands what is happening. So breathing in long, I know that I'm breathing in long. Breathing in short, I know that I'm breathing out short. So it's not about striving to get anything, but just being really aware, knowing what's happening, bringing that quality of presence to it. So the second aspect of mindfulness of the body has to do with the 4 postures, which are listed as sitting, walking, standing, and lying down. These are the traditional postures of meditation. Many times people learn about sitting primarily, but actually it's very good to alternate different postures. Not only because the knees might get sore, the back might get sore, but energetically it has a different effect on the system. So if I'm feeling tired, I might choose to stand up. If I have enough energy, I might recline, do it like a reclining posture on my side. But one has to be careful not to do that when you're feeling tired, or it'll turn into sleeping meditation, which isn't really meditation. But some people do say that you can do that lying down posture and then go to sleep and be mindful of that very last breath, and know whether you're breathing in before you go to sleep, and when you wake up, even know whether you're breathing in or out. So then we're really talking about continuity of practice. And that's what I like also about this sutta. It lends itself very much to a continuous mindfulness practice. So instead of getting up and saying, okay, meditation's over, now I go on to something else, it's noticing. The next aspect is having full awareness when moving forwards, backwards, when you're looking ahead, looking away. So, you can get up, you can notice the sensations one feels in the body, the shift, the weight, the pressure. There's some traditions that really focus in on this, like the Burmese tradition. Mahasi Sayadaw taught about how when you walk, you're feeling every minute detail. I once did a retreat and I noticed the mind just wanted to run off, but actually this makes it kind of pinned down, and it's not for everybody, but it's really a very focused practice. You look at heat, you look at pressure, you look at the different elements, and we'll get to that in a minute. And it's one way of just really focusing on your experience. But in daily life, we probably won't be walking around that slowly the way they do in a retreat. So the tradition I come from, the Ajahn Chah tradition, they emphasize more of a natural kind of walking style, because we can do that when we walk from one building to another, when we walk from one room to another. We can put this into application. So I also forgot to mention with the mindfulness of breathing, as I said, the Buddha doesn't actually say that where it's located, but there are some traditions that really focus in on certain parts, the abdomen or the nose. And I did a retreat with the Goenka method, and there they emphasize a lot the nose. And he also goes and does this body scanning, which has become very popular, and it's actually, can be very helpful to bringing oneself into the present, because that's the beauty of the body. It's here. And so when we're with the body, our mind isn't off in the future and it's not off in the past. So with the body scanning, as you may know, you bring attention to one part of the body, maybe starting at the top and gradually going usually quite slowly, and feeling every sensation, heat, pressure, tension, contractedness, and then you can consciously relax that part of the body, and then go on all the way down through to your feet. And some people can just spend, an hour or longer just doing that. And your mind can get very focused. And the point isn't only about concentration. It's really, if it's vipassana, that word pasana again is seeing into the nature of reality. So what is happening in terms of change? And we'll get more into that in a minute. So moving, when you do yoga, mindfulness, movement, there's classes nowadays about mindfulness in movement, and I think it's really good. When you're doing prostration, I've been trying to do it with the idea that I know that I'm placing my hands here, I know that I'm bending over. You can bring it into any movement. And as I said, it overlaps with the feeling. So if you're moving and then there's an unpleasant feeling, to just register there's an unpleasant feeling. And part of doing all this is to stop the proliferation of the mind from going into all kinds of stories about what's happening, but to just stay with really what's happening. Yes?
When you say, I know I am prostrating, I know I'm placing my hands, is this the words I know means that I'm conscious
Yes.
of it?
Oh, yes. I'm aware, I'm conscious. It doesn't have to be said verbally. Some of the Burmese traditions, they recommend that things are noted. So it's like you make a little mental note, sitting, walking, moving, thinking. But if you do it without actually verbalizing, that's fine, because I think it's more fluid that way. But to begin with, some people recommend that you use a little note. I'm not suggesting you do this when you're doing prostrations, because you probably have something else going on, and I don't want to say that you shouldn't. So, but it can sound really basic. Of course I know I'm moving. Of course I know this. But have you ever gotten a bruise, and then later on you looked and you thought, "Hey, where did that come from?" Now, obviously, you banged yourself, but you weren't aware of it at the time. Even banging yourself. And how many other things do we do and we're not aware of them? And this can get into the whole, kind of discussion around free choice. We think we're actually doing all these things, but if we really look at the cause and effect, whole dependent origination, which comes into this teaching, then actually these things just spin out on their own a lot more than we like to acknowledge. So we will hopefully when we bring mindfulness to them, that's when we have a chance to stop this chain of just being pulled along in our experience. So the next area of mindfulness of the body is foulness of body parts, asubha, non-beautiful. Now, this is one that some people cringe at, but yes. It's the fourth. So there was mindfulness of breathing, of postures, of movements, full awareness of movements, and now the unattractive aspects of the body. So we do a chant where we list the 32 parts of the body. Now, other people said there's more than 32. Well, probably they're right. That's not the point, but it is it's very similar to what we did this morning in Lam Rim, and I was really pleased that we did that, because it's looking at these parts very objectively so that we know this is not me. But that's the insight that arises through this practice, So, you know, you look at, I mean, they list all the parts that, you know, that are gross as well. You know, the spittle, the phlegm, the mucus, the urine, the blood, the sweat, the fat, and just to bring awareness to this. And the Buddha gives an analogy and says it's like if you were looking into a sack of grains and you were seeing all the different types. And when Venerable Tarpa brought that sack of grains, I thought, oh, perfect, there's a visual right there. So it's like if you were looking inside and you were saying, okay, there's the peas, there's the lentils, there's this, and just knowing it for what it is. And some people will take offense to this because they'll say, actually, the body's amazing, it's really beautiful. Why are we making it out to be some awful thing? Well, it's not making it out to be either awful or fantastic. It's just really looking at it for what it is. But it's it may not be useful for some people, but for other people, particularly if they're caught into, say, the other side, which is being absorbed into the attractiveness of the body, and that kind of delusion that we can have when we take a look at something that's beautiful, a person, and get infatuated very quickly by their hair and their you know, lovely teeth, or their, you know, they give this a lot to monks, young monks. And you know, they can get infatuated with a woman, especially if they never see them, and then all of a sudden they try to get them to do these kind of practices. So the idea is to cool it down and to look more objectively at something. So you might think, oh, that person's hair is gorgeous, but then if it's in your soup, is it gorgeous? You know, their fingernails are pretty until they're, you know, sitting on you or something, or you get the idea. So there was a group of monks in the Buddha's time who did this contemplation, and they got so grossed out, and they actually said half of them committed suicide. So then when the Buddha came back, he says, where are they all? And then it was told, and as an antidote, the Buddha gave the mindfulness of breathing, which is a very beautiful meditation practice for actually many pleasant states can arise. Not to be attached to, but still they can be those kind of allowable pleasures. I didn't go to spend too much time on that, but I noticed, I think you have a book in the library called Breath by Larry Rosenberg, and it's really nice. So you can really rest into the whole beauty of being with the breath. So we can go to different extremes, and that's why we have to use our discernment to be careful with what effect things are having on us. So the fifth of the exercises of mindfulness of the body has to do with the elements: earth, water, fire, and air. One could also consider space, but traditionally it's these four. And we can notice where they are in the body. So if you want to focus one at a time, say on the water element, you can think of the tears, the saliva, you know, as it goes down, blood. You can use your imagination here. If it's a hot day, what else? Sweat. And you can do that with the earth element, heaviness of the bones, the sense of weight. You can do it with the fire element, heat, air, breathing, also the wind or gas element coming in out of the body. So this is very practical, and from time to time it's helpful to switch and try different ones because they have different effects, and it can again make us look at this body as in a very objective way, so as not to, you know, to create the whole sense of ego around it. I mean, that happens, but this is a way of kind of approaching it from a different direction. So again, I said because it's so practical, I like this. So on a day that's hot, I'll be sitting in the meditation, and maybe the mind could start to go, oh, why do we meditate at this time of the day? Why we should do it differently. This is so hot, we need a fan, why don't we open the window? All this mental proliferation, and I'm suffering over this. Whereas if I look at it and I think, oh, okay, this is my opportunity, like Venerable Tarpa was talking about the hell realms, well, you can do it a different way, which is just, okay, this is the heat element. And notice where you feel that heat element in your body. It might be between the crease in your knees or the back, different places. And you can feel the water element with the sweat on the body. You can feel the earth element with the kind of tiredness or the nodding of the head if that happens. And the air element, or lack of. So everything we have in our experience is very useful. And then the last exercise is actually, they say it's 9. It's the charnel ground contemplations. Now, back in the time of the Buddha, they could actually go to charnel grounds and see dead bodies in various stages of decay. We don't have that opportunity, and for many people it can sound very morbid anyhow, and you may not even want to. But I was given some slides, I have on my computer, and it's interesting just to notice the effect it has on one to look at a body that's dead. Some of us have been to many funerals and seen bodies, others maybe not. And it's surprising how many times people can get quite old in their, quite far along in their life and haven't seen a dead body. And again, this may sound morbid, but this is the end that we all will have. And that was one of the Devadutas that the Buddha saw that made him want to go forth into the homeless life. When he saw the sick person, the dead person, the old person, and then the renunciant, the sadhu. So it's quite powerful. And but if we don't have that chance to put our, to be in that situation, we could use our imagination a bit. And sometimes if I'm doing lying down meditation, I might imagine, flat, really prone, but I might imagine myself in a coffin. Or you might imagine a loved one in a coffin. It's not to be depressing. It's very sobering. It can be, it's actually one of the antidotes to restlessness. Because if the mind's flying all over the place and thinking about all kinds of things, this kind of brings it back, reality check. And that's what it's meant to do, not to depress you. Sometimes I might see a person and you can imagine a skeleton walking toward you, or your own skeleton. Some people get really good at imagining. It's not my strong point, but maybe some of you, because you've done much more of the visualization, imagine yourself as a skeleton or other people as a skeleton. And this is also what we're going to end up with after the flesh goes away. Are there any questions or comments on this?
That meditation, there's a practice of it where you go out and then you see everything as a skeleton. The whole earth is full of skeletons.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So they add up to 14 because the 9 charnel ground contemplations are considered individually. And there's just various stages of decay. Now, there's a refrain for all of the above and the subsequent contemplations as well. Now, this is where insight really can arise, and I feel this is a very important refrain. So, after each of these, going through each of these mindfulness practices of the body, and then again later on feelings and mind objects, it says, in this way, she abides contemplating the body as body internally, externally, and both internally and externally. and she abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. So I like to just highlight those words because I think they're very significant. Internally, externally, and both internally and externally. So we're probably used to doing a lot of these contemplations within our own bodies, mindfulness of our breathing. But we can also be aware that other people are breathing too. Mindfulness of, since the elements, the heat. We can also be aware that other people are experiencing heat. And we can see that this is a common shared experience of what it is to be human. I feel it's really important when it gets to mind states, because when we get into things like anger or sadness or grief, and other people are obviously expressing that, and we think, oh, they have a big problem. Well, do I ever experience that too? This is anger. And we can start to tease apart the sense of self that arises when we attach to these things, when we start to see them as just for what they are. They are dependently arisen, and they are not myself. So anger is anger. It's not me or it's not you. And that internal, external, it does help to connect us to our fellow human beings. And then the second is the nature of arising and passing. This is has to do with not only the acknowledgement that everything is arising and passing, the breath, the sensation of heat. It's not always going to be with us. Yesterday you might have felt very hot at one point, but maybe not when you went back to the residence or at night. So obviously these things change, and just knowing they change is very important. The Buddha said that the contemplation of impermanence was actually more important than all the dana and all the metta, and I mean it was really given a lot of importance. So just to register whenever things are changing. But also not only that they are changing, but maybe how they are changing. So you may have heard this is like this because that is like that. So what gives rise to something, to know the cause. That's when mindfulness builds momentum, it gets sharp, and you can start to pick out, well, this is what was preceding this mind state or this physical state. So this all comes into play when we're talking about the nature of arising and passing away. And then knowing there is a body, just the bare knowledge and mindfulness. And then abides independently, not clinging to anything in the world. And I thought, this is again, the Lam Rim this morning was brilliant, because it was about this very topic, about the sense of an independent self. Now this is coming from a different perspective. What does this word independent mean? Because here it's saying one should abide independent. So obviously it's not about an independent self. I am abiding as an I, an ego, I'm the boss, I'm in control kind of thing. I'm separate from you. But actually, it's when we attend in this way to these physical sensations and mental states, then when we abide without clinging to them, then that's when the sense of I isn't constellated. It's not created. So we're not attaching to the khandhas in a way that gives rise to the sense of self. We're using the bare attention. So instead of saying, I am hot, one knows this is the heat element. Instead of I am running, we can know the leg is extending, the arms are lifting, the breath is a bit short. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's where I feel there's a lot of benefit in this, because where we get trapped in suffering so much is when it's all constellated around me. So it's not just a game of semantics or just a reduction. It may seem like a reductionistic approach. Why are we taking life and just chopping it up into these little bits? It is an exercise, but it has a purpose, And the purpose is to see things as they are, and then to know when we're adding extra to it. So the next contemplation is on feelings. Now the Pali word is Vedana, and it does not refer to emotions. We commonly use the word feeling in place of emotion, but here it's used just in three feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And you might just sometime experiment with just spending a period of time noticing the types of feelings you experience. And again, this could be along with the heat. This is unpleasant. And that's interesting. You take a taste of something, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Which one don't we notice very much? Neutral, right. As I've spoken, I bet probably not many of you have thought about your belly button. No? Because it probably doesn't give you much pain, right? But maybe a few thoughts have been on the back, yeah? Maybe a few thoughts in the shoulders. Yeah? So our attention goes to what's pleasant and what's unpleasant. And how do we habitually react to these? What do we do with pleasant? Attach, grab, grasp. And with the unpleasant? Push away. So this is where that whole wheel of dependent origination comes in, and how suffering gets created. So if we can notice these feelings, like on the wheel of dependent origination, you have contact, and then you have feeling, and then you have the clinging. So those three, without even knowing the rest, are a really good area to kind of focus in on, because where is it that we can bring mindfulness and break that chain? Well, when we have contact,
feeling arises, it's the grasping.
Yeah, I think it's between the feeling and the grasping, because we can't really protect ourselves so much from every contact. But when the contact is there, we know it, and then we can know that maybe the tendency to grasp it, but if we have that mindfulness and the wisdom arises, we can refrain from that habitual tendency, and we are retraining the mind that way. So the mind, through all these very mundane activities, can be all retrained. And that's extremely powerful, because the Buddha taught that we're actually in this very existence because we've hopped on that wheel, we haven't gotten off of it. We've come into this life because we've been craving for something. And it is a fortunate life, because we can do this practice now. But the idea is not to keep going around and around and around again. So here's a place where we can really take a look.
So just to clarify, so the feeling arises. There's absolutely nothing to think about the feeling, but immediately training our minds to recognize the feeling and not clinging right there.
Yes, yes.
Right, that's the point.
I think so. Yeah. So the next foundation of mindfulness is contemplation of mind or mental states. So this carries right on from the feelings, because what happens when you have an unpleasant feeling and you want to get rid of it, but you can't? It's when we get emotion coming up, right? Anger. I don't want this heat, because I want a fan. So there comes all kinds of emotions. So we might seek to distract ourselves because we're not happy with what we're experiencing. We might seek to, we might just go into depression or sadness, helplessness, rage. All these kind of emotions, they're secondary. They come after the initial contact feeling and the craving. But here is another really rich area to notice. Just notice, this is anger. And when our mindfulness gets sharp and we've got momentum, we can start to notice what gave rise to the anger. We may have had a thought, it shouldn't be like this, and we've grasped that thought. So it's not to judge the mental states. It's not to say anger is wrong or bad, grief, sadness is wrong or bad, but to try to understand them, to know them directly for what they are, and to relate skillfully with them. So there's a list of mind states that is in this sutta. So they're really down to the bare basics, which is mind affected by lust or greed, the mind affected by hatred or aversion, the mind affected by delusion or ignorance, which underlines the other two, the contracted mind, the distracted mind, the exalted or unexalted mind, the surpassed and unsurpassed mind, the concentrated and the unconcentrated mind, and the liberated and the unliberated mind. So even if we are to experience the distracted mind, it's not bad ultimately, because we can know it as the distracted mind. Now we might want to do something to try to focus our mind, but we need to be careful that we're not trying just to push away our experience, because even in meditation we can actually further bad habits. We can further the types of, the tendencies of the mind which we don't want, grasping onto the pleasant. If we have a really wonderful meditation and it feels great, then we might just want to cling to that. And what will happen next time? Because it's going to change and you're not going to be happy, right? So it's not just that certain mind states are considered good or bad, or certain meditations good or bad, but knowing what they are, and then it's their nature to change anyhow. And then if we go back to the refrain, which I said earlier, knowing this internally, externally, and both internally and externally, then again we can see, okay, there's sadness there within myself. I can see there might be sadness with somebody else. Maybe I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like it, the facial cues. But we can notice our reaction to that. Maybe we want to push it away. We don't want that to be there. And the other person, we might want to cheer them up. And it's not to say you can't do anything kind, but how does it affect you? And can I know, if I know this is sadness, then I know in myself it's dependently arisen. It's caused by certain causes and conditions. It's not permanent. It's not ultimately who I am. So we tend to fix people's angry people, sad people, or oh gosh, keep away from her. It's not a good day. Well, that might be wise too. But anyhow, if we get a sense of the nature of these mind states in ourselves, then we're more likely to have compassion for other people who experience them, because we know they're not pleasant. So I think that's one of the benefits from this practice, is it didn't actually specifically say, but developing the compassion because we have the understanding. Yes?
What is unsurpassed?
These have more to do with the kind of mind states that when one goes into concentration, and I didn't want to dwell a lot on them because I don't have a lot of experience with them. But if you go into very blissful states and you kind of are leaving, you might be leaving the sense of the physicality of your body, or you might be a sense of oneness with the whole universe. I mean, I would suggest you look that up a bit, because it's like sometimes the mind can be very contracted and caught into certain tight spots, and other times it can be just very expanded. Okay, so it's a good question. I don't want to say exactly, because I think again it's something to be experienced individually. So yeah, as I said, it's the attitude and how we relate to these mind states that's really important. Knowing them as they are, allowing them to be there without furthering that habit of aversion, whether it's unpleasant or pleasant, that we don't judge our experience. So I'm going a bit quickly on this because I know the limitation of time, but there are some really excellent resources I could point you to. One is a book by Bhante Analayo. It's called Satipatthana, The Direct Path to Realization. And if I'm correct, I think he spent 9 years studying this sutta to write this book. And now he's on solitary retreat to really put it into practice fully. So, and then there's a teacher who I like a lot, a lay teacher named Joseph Goldstein, and he's from the IMS on Forest Refuge in Massachusetts. He did 42 sessions of an hour or more each on this particular sutta. So you see, to try to get into all the nuances and details is hard to do in an hour. But maybe it'll whet your appetite. So then the contemplation of mind objects. Now this has to do with, again, sets of things, ways we're looking at our experience from the perspective of Dhamma. So the first is looking at the 5 hindrances, nivarana. And maybe you're familiar with sensual desire, restlessness, ill will, sloth and torpor, and doubt. And there are traditionally some antidotes to this, and I've heard you use that word antidotes a lot. So earlier when I said we're not trying to get rid of these things, it's kind of a fine line, because obviously if you have a hindrance, it is getting in the way. It's an obstacle. It's going to maybe throw you off the path or prevent you from experiencing the fullness of what we could experience, the richness of what meditation can offer, and the insight that can come from that. So it's not something to just say, oh yeah, it doesn't matter if I have sloth and torpor, just go with the flow. And it's not like that. We can do something to counteract it, but it's important to not come from a place of aversion, but just knowing, okay, this is sloth and torpor, and one could investigate if there's enough energy. It does require some energy to investigate. If you have sloth and torpor, that might be hard, but you can investigate perhaps what gave rise to that. And you can go into different types of contemplations, and you can watch it shift. So it's neither giving in completely to it, nor is it pushing it away and say, I just don't want to deal with this. It's unpleasant. I could go into each of them in more detail and talk about the antidotes, but maybe we'll just see if there's interest in that later. Well, I'll just want to just reiterate again around this sense of self that arises when we do attach to the mind states, because when we have the critical mind come up and we judge ourselves and we judge others, it's because we haven't seen things truly as they are. We haven't seen these things as in an objective way. We think, I'm the one who is restless, or she's the one who has the sloth and torpor. Yes, it's present in this physical body, okay? It's not to deny that. But in an ultimate sense, this is all the flow, the rising, the passing of phenomena. And when we start to see that, then we can pull ourselves away from some very painful stories, being a victim, being a villain. It's not to say that there isn't a place for acknowledging when wrong has been done, when unskillful things have been done, having some regret, but it's how much this takes hold of us, and how much we've created the story of who we are around all these things over many, many years. So we're trying to reverse some of these habits that give rise to a lot of suffering. So to conclude, this body and mind is really our treasure trove. This is a wonderful asset that we have, and that we can look into wherever we go. We won't have to be bored, because there's always something happening. And the Buddha said, if one should develop these 4 foundations of mindfulness for 7 years, one of true fruits can be expected, either final knowledge here and now, or, if there's a trace of clinging left, non-returning. So then he brings it down, reduces that time frame, not just 7 years, but 7 months, and then 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 1 month, half a month, or then 7 days. If we were to be mindful in a fully, continuous way for 7 days, there would be, we'd have it. But it's not easy. It's not easy. So, but there is a promise in that this is a very powerful and very inclusive teaching, and I hope it has been of some benefit to this introduction, and I'd like to hear now from you how you might work with these kind of things. So,
I have a question, please.
Yes.
In your experience, how do you decide when to move from mindfulness of the body to feelings to mind? How do you navigate that?
Okay. It's pretty organic. So if I am experiencing, the body's always a good place to start, but if my mind is being caught in some story and or obsessed with what's going to happen in the future, or worried, anxious, first of all, I have to have some mindfulness to know that that's happening, right? And then I might say, okay, this is not having a good effect on me, this is not skillful. Maybe I do need to attend to something, but not right now. Maybe I do have to worry about what flight I'm going to take next, but not during meditation. Can't do anything about it. So come back to the body. So if I'm experiencing a lot of restlessness, a lot of thinking, then I try to come back to the body as an anchor. If I've got a lot of stability in the body and a lot of calm, then I might bring up a different contemplation, such as the contemplation of death, or the contemplation of one of these other ones that I've mentioned. If I'm walking, then obviously that's the time for being mindful of the movement. So it's very responsive to what's actually happening, which of course requires some degree of mindfulness in the beginning. But then where you go with that, just up to you. Does that help?
Yeah, I think because we've heard these teachings, but I personally haven't done a retreat on these teachings, it probably would be very good to do a retreat on these things so that you have a place to go to when these things arise.
Yeah.
So initially I think, would have to be a lot of investigation for each one.
Right,
to then
right.
use it as, it's sounding like almost like you use it as an antidote.
You can, yes. But as the basics, myself personally, I use the mindfulness of the body, the breath, and then when I have enough established mindfulness, usually I notice a lot more the mental states arising. It's like if you had a very calm lake, then you can look down into it and see all the rubbish on the bottom. So then you look at that and you notice, oh gosh, this, stuff just arises on its own in retreats. That's why it's not always so fun and easy. So then I attend to that. So I'll attend to the mental state, and I'll notice if I'm pushing it away or if I'm grasping at it. I spent a bit of time with the teacher in Burma, and his main emphasis was on the chitta nupassana, the mind states, and, not mind objects, but whether the mind is affected by greed, hatred, or delusion. And I find that really useful. But any entryway is absolutely fine, and it may sound like a lot, but I don't want to make it feel overwhelming. So, yes.
I'm wondering what effect you've had in your practice from contemplating the mindfulness of feeling.
Well, I find it just helps to stop the mind from going into stories. It helps just bring it down to this is pleasant or this is unpleasant. So with pleasant feelings, we just can get lost, you know, wanting them and just thinking, oh, this is great. I shared with some of you about when I went into a swimming pool. I just got lost, but it came back and it, you know, it passed. But if we know pleasant is pleasant, then we won't get carried away so much. All of these are things, although I'm presenting them, it's not like I'm doing them all the time. It's my job, it's my work. I want to, you know, and the teacher I go to in Burma stresses the continuity, because then we build strength of mindfulness. And with that strength, then wisdom becomes, you know, rising on its own, and that's where we start to cut through delusion. So, yes.
Where do you look when you're looking for feeling?
Well, you can notice it in the body, pleasant feeling or unpleasant feeling in the leg, the knees, whatever. But it's a good question, because I don't think it's separated from the mind, because you can't register that. I mean, those of you who are know about the body-mind connection, you know, you just can't separate the two. If you were maybe in a coma or something, you would have some kind of separation where you wouldn't register what was happening. But you always need some mental aspect, don't you? That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's both places. I mean, it's ultimately registered in the mind, even if it's felt first in the body. Yes?
I just wanted to express how much I appreciate these teachings, and I don't think you were here on Sunday when we had a sharing the Dharma Day, and we did teachings on impermanence and dukkha, but this is sort of giving me a similar feeling that I'm not trying to attach to the pleasantness of, but it's like renewed a sense of curiosity and taking me back to the beginning of why am I interested in Buddhism, and it really clears out a lot of the feeling I have of being lost in some of the practices here with the visualizations and things that I don't connect to right away. Oh, well, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm doing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Yes.
I have a feeling you all described this, but
Please.
bear with me to ask a little bit more. It seems like when you're watching the feelings that the one of the real hazardous points is saying whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, and the judgment values, especially like if you're sitting. You know, the leg starts to tingle, and you're like, oh, that's got to be bad. You know,
Right.
my leg's going to fall off.
Right.
You know? But in fact, after a minute, it goes away, and you're like, well, why did I think that was so bad?
Right.
So I don't know.
No, it's a very good point you raise. It's a very good point. That connection between contact and feeling, how we interpret it, that feeling, has a lot to do with our prior experience. In the Burmese tradition, I think that it would be discouraged to say this is pleasant or unpleasant, but more of just, I feel pressure, I feel tingling, I feel movement, the air, wind. That's why they're so precise. They're really just teasing it all out. And then, you know, some people actually use pain and go into that pain, and then after they go into it, you know, bringing their awareness to that sensation and noticing this kind of vibration and heat, coolness, whatever it is, it's not pain anymore. It just is what it is. So it's a very good point. I think when we have that label pleasant, unpleasant, it's because already we've grasped, you know.
This way would really lead you into such self-acceptance without all that proliferation.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That self-acceptance is really important. Even if we do say, oh, this is painful, don't go, I shouldn't be thinking this is painful. You know, never then add more to it. So accept the fact that that thought has arisen. That's a thought. So this is what I love about this teaching, is that you can't go wrong as long as you bring awareness to it. So you have a thought of judgment. Okay, there's a thought. Don't start thinking, I have such a problem, I can't do this. You know, da-da-da. Yes?
I also noticed that there was a lot of mention of dependent origination and dependent arising. And I'm curious if your tradition speaks as much about emptiness as this sort of tradition does. Or if it's not used that term, or...
The term isn't used as much, but it's very much implied. We use the word anatta, non-self. So if everything is of the nature to not have any permanence, not to have any solid sense of self, then it is empty. So what is it empty of? It's empty of self. I love the word, and I remember reading one of the great masters in our tradition saying that his favorite teaching was the teaching sunyata, emptiness. And it's absolutely wonderful. So it's something that's definitely in here and to be realized. You're welcome. Are there, now can I ask you questions? Are there ways in which you do some of this contemplations, but maybe slightly differently, like say dealing with hindrances, or do you ever imagine the body as unpleasant? And is it? Can you explain?
Pretty well. Not everyone's been here. I've been to start many times in the 5 hindrances.
Okay.
In our monastic training, especially, she went into great length on, we did all the contemplations on the body.
Okay.
All the
Yeah.
9.
Yeah.
We memorized those.
Okay.
She sometimes with the public doesn't go into a lot of depth on the foulness of the body, but she mentions it. She taught actually on the 4 foundations of mindfulness for quite a long time.
Okay.
We went into all 4.
Okay.
Now this winter we'll be doing a retreat on it.
Great. Yeah, so it's not new at all. It's all stuff you have.
But I was thinking though, when we lead our meditations in the morning, and we come in and we do the breathing meditation, I think that we might need to guide the breathing meditation more for new people, because I'm getting the sense from what you're saying that I'm not sure what you're doing during that time. If it's not anything of any of this, then I'm not sure that we're guiding it right. If we're not doing, you know what I'm saying? Because we're doing breathing meditation every morning when we come in here, but we're not always guiding it because we're assuming people know enough. And I'm thinking that your comment isn't so unusual. And that's why we've changed the way we've taught a little bit over as the years have gone by. We don't really teach so much the sadhanas and the visualization practices when we come in here in the morning. We just do now breathing meditation and for this reason. But I think that we're not maybe instructing enough. I'm not instructing enough during the breathing meditation. I think I'm going to go back and be more proactive in that.
I think if you're like referring to what I said about being lost in some of the practices, I'm speaking more of like visualizing the 35 Buddhas and the mantra garlands. And this sort of teaching helps me see the pragmatic or the practical benefit. So instead of me thinking that there's some mantra garlands made out of light and then they bless me, I think mindfulness of my speech is very helpful, if that makes sense. So I just haven't connected as much to the visualizing light sorts of things, but being mindful of the prostrations, what my body is doing, I think could be very beneficial.
Although we receive teaching from these, I think it's not as foundational to a practice. That's the big difference. And also, I think when Venerable Children was teaching it that winter, we were in retreat, and people just had profound experience of applying this in our retreat experience. We were kind of hungry, I think, in some way. I know I am.
Everyone
I think
was.
every one of us
Yeah.
is kind of wanting that to underscore all the other stuff we've been
Yeah.
doing for years and years and years. It's like,
Okay.
And that hunger is, Leah has expressed that too.
Yeah.
She's another long-time student. I told her
Okay.
that you were here and teaching on this, and she wrote back and said, yes, this is like so important in my practice. And that I have that sense of us all here too. Is to just, and even Venerable Children, she said,
Yeah.
I've not ever done a retreat on this, and she wants to.
Oh,
You know, it's
good,
like,
good.
it's just so grounding.
Mm-hmm.
Everything,
Yeah.
pulling everything together was our experience.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's-
yeah, yeah. So it's completely interlaced in the practices that we've learned forever, but somehow it's laid out as it is in that sutra. It's just
Well, if any of you
foundational.
are interested in the 42 talks by Joseph Goldstein, I have them on a little external drive, and I could easily just give them. I found it so useful. What I did is I did a kind of solitary retreat using that.
Wow.
So I listened to a tape, and I would, a talk, and I would just do that, and then another one, and it was so good. I really benefited from it. So, even though it's not, as emphasized, it is the real core of the Theravada, and some people could say that is pretty dry, and that they need more of the heart connection. So we all have different things to add. So I've already experienced some things that I haven't in my tradition, which have been beneficial to me. Even though I don't have the facility yet around these visualizations either. There's something that it's working here, because I feel it amongst yourselves, the kindness, the compassion, and when I can open to that, I feel a big effect. So we all have different aspects we emphasize, that's all.
It's really lovely to be able to come together in this way. I think as Westerners, to really try and understand where Buddhism comes to our hearts as a larger community.
Yeah.
And I think that this kind of sharing is so important and so lovely, because it's like we're affecting each other in a really powerful way.
Yeah.
It's really lovely to hear these teachings from someone who's done a lot of practice in a different tradition and see all the kind of sort of eclectic benefits that we can get from learning like this.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree. Because I didn't know much about Tibetan practice, so coming here has been really good for me, because now I won't just think, oh, what are they doing? And likewise, yourself. There's so much shared common ground, and as our humanity and how we relate in community. It's really been good.
Oh, would you please come again?
I'm very happy to, if I can. Yes, now that I'll be based in the States, down in Southern California, it might be possible. Yeah.
Great. And does your teacher there, since she is Burmese,
Yes.
does she teach in this style also? Like if a person wanted to go do a little retreat with some guidance?
I can ask her. She hasn't been teaching a lot of retreats. She goes to a lot of retreats. Some of the really well-known teachers, like Sayadaw U Pandita was her teacher. Usilananda, which you have a book on the shelf by, was her teacher. And not everybody, wants to go into that minute kind of detail. But if somebody was interested, I'm sure she'd be willing. So hopefully we can get the facilities. This is what we need to envision, and then invite people to come and enjoy being there on the retreat and learn and have this exchange. I love the exchange. Yeah.
My first contact with Buddhism was with Guanko. I did a 10-day Vipassana.
Yeah.
So
How was that for you?
lovely.
Oh, good.
I think something also that I've understood the Dalai Lama to say is not just to learn about what the different traditions have in common, but that learning the differences really enriches our practice. And that's sort of what I'm taking from this, is what is different.
Right.
And that's really useful for me, at least.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I had that question, so thank you. Have you heard anything that sounds really different, or is it the way you... Okay.
But the way that you put some of the explanations together has deepened what already was known.
Okay.
So that's lovely.
Oh, good. Good.
And of course I was delighted to hear that the Buddha said you could do it in 7 years, let alone 7 days.
Yeah. Patience. 7 lifetimes.
Yeah. What I experienced at Blanco, that Vipassana, I was able to really stay mindful for the whole time. And I notice now that I don't do that. That staying really mindful on my breath, I'm gone most of the time. So, but I have still that memory that I know I can do it. So
Yeah. Well, there you have a really tight, it's a pretty tight container, and you're spending 10 hours a day, and it's not easy on the body. It's like jumping in the deep end. It was my first experience too, and my friend called it Buddha boot camp. You know, so I knew I couldn't sustain it, but I also saw that that container, when you build up a certain amount of momentum, then yes, it is quite powerful. Whatever is arising can be seen and kind of held. And that so I tasted the power of it, but I knew I couldn't sustain that as an ongoing lifestyle. But what I like about this teaching is that it does make it something you can integrate in a normal day. I mean, you have a lot of these things I've noticed in the bathroom, the awareness of what you're doing, and all these little signs, reminders, a bit like Thich Nhat Hanh, the kind of that's mindfulness. Good. So thank you for your patience and your interest and inviting me to offer this. Well, sometimes somebody else in the audience would say, a Pali phrase that is basically saying, if you have found benefit to these teachings, say sadhu, and then everybody would say sadhu.